On RNN News today, you will hear a story that will leave you shocked and questioning everything you thought you knew. Because when a retired United States Army Lieutenant Colonel Green Beret named Tony Aguilar stepped forward to speak, he revealed a truth that he says is not political, but deeply human. He explained that the method and system of delivering aid to Gaza is not in line with American values, and he began his story by saying that 20 Palestinians had lost their lives while simply trying to reach food distribution sites. Aguilar served 25 years in the U.S. Army, deployed to Iraq, Afghanistan, and other operational missions. And when he was offered a contract with UG Solutions under the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, he believed he was signing up for a noble cause, a mission to feed starving people in Gaza, so he accepted and spent 45 days in Israel carrying out this work. But what he saw changed everything. Aguilar explained that the IDF controlled every single detail of the aid delivery. They decided where to deliver, when to deliver, how much food would be given, and even how long the team would stay at each site. Yet from the very first day, what Aguilar witnessed was not orderly aid distribution, but chaos and pandemonium. The way Palestinians were forced to reach the food was what he compared to the Hunger Games survival of the fittest. Those who could run faster and arrive first got something, while the weak, the children, the women, the elderly, and the disabled were left with nothing. He described in detail how the process of clearing the sites was carried out not by order or fairness, but through violence, shooting at civilians, spraying pepper spray, firing rubber bullets from shotguns, and releasing tear gas. And he emphasized that this was not rare, this was not a one-off incident, this was every day at every distribution site. He insisted this was not propaganda, not exaggeration, not words from the Gaza Ministry of Health, but his own direct eyewitness account. One day on May 29th at Site Number 4, Aguilar personally saw a UG contractor open fire with his weapon into the crowd, shooting at their feet, over their heads, and directly into people while celebrating and shouting "woo-hoo." Another contractor next to Aguilar said, "I think you got one," and the shooter replied, "Hell yeah, boy." Aguilar recorded this and said he saw with his own eyes a man fall to the ground and never get up, and in his judgment, that man was dead in another incident just days later on June 2nd at Site Number 1 in Rafah. Aguilar described a UG contractor throwing a stun grenade into the crowd. The metal fuse top struck a Palestinian woman in the head, dropping her lifeless to the ground. A donkey cart was called in to carry her away on the orders of SRS leadership, and Aguilar said plainly that she was dead. This was happening at aid distribution sites supposedly created to help starving civilians. Aguilar explained that even when reports were made to leadership about dangerous situations, like at Site Number R3 on May 28th, where he warned that without changes people would die, nothing was changed. And as he predicted, on July 16th, 20 Palestinians were killed, trampled to death while trying to reach food aid in Khan. Eunice Aguilar said these deaths were preventable, that they were on us as Americans, because U.S. contractors were present and U.S. taxpayer dollars were funding this system. He went on to say that in all the dozens of distributions he personally attended, not once did he see a real threat. Not once did he see a weapon in the crowd. Not once did he see a Palestinian posing danger. Instead, he said that at times the only live fire came from the IDF itself in Rafah, where the city was reduced to rubble. People had to travel up to 12 kilometers on foot with no vehicles and often no shoes through an active war zone just to reach food distribution, and there was no water in the aid, no proper shelter, no safety. Aguilar recounted heartbreaking moments where he personally saw a Palestinian father carrying his dead child and a mother carrying hers. Both children not killed by bullets or disease, but simply from starvation. He stressed that he saw this with his own eyes and that it was real. Americans, he said, do not line up starving people, force them to walk through war zones, and then greet them with rubber bullets, tear gas, stun grenades, and pepper spray before sending them away still hungry to him. This was not American. This was not aligned with the values he swore to uphold during 25 years of service. What Aguilar wanted Americans to understand was that this system of distribution was not feeding the people of Gaza, but was actually starving them because the amount of aid was so small and the mechanism so broken that families were being pushed further into desperation and death. He said clearly that it was his duty to speak because U.S. taxpayers were the ones funding this, and they deserved to know the truth. He explained that when he was hired on May 14th, his contract was supposed to last until August 21. But within a month, by June 14, he had already seen enough. He had personally witnessed indiscriminate shooting, unjustified use of force, and outright failures of leadership. And every time he reported these issues with solutions and recommendations, he was ignored. He emphasized that he wanted the mission to succeed because he believed in feeding starving people. But when the leadership chose to ignore warnings and allowed atrocities to continue, that became his red line. It crossed his moral threshold, and he could not continue. So he terminated his contract and returned home. Aguilar reminded viewers that after 25 years of service, when he took off his uniform, he never took off his oath. His loyalty was to the Constitution and to American values, not to any president or political party or private company. And it was those values that pushed him to come forward. He described how, in his assessment, the entire operation in Gaza was designed in a way that not only failed to relieve suffering, but actively created new suffering. He said Americans are not supposed to set up food distributions that force starving men, women, and children to risk their lives through conflict zones, only to be attacked at the site with rubber bullets, pepper spray, and stun grenades. This was not the American way. In his words, the system in place right now is failing, and Americans are complicit because of their tax dollars. He underlined that the reality on the ground in Gaza was unlike anything most people could imagine. Entire neighborhoods destroyed, families forced to walk for miles barefoot, hungry, thirsty, exhausted, and often losing loved ones along the way, just to stand in chaotic crowds where violence was used to push them back. Aguilar spoke of the emotional burden he carried when he saw fathers and mothers carrying the lifeless bodies of their children who had died not from bombs or disease, but from starvation itself, and he wanted Americans to picture that. Because that was the result of a broken aid system, he warned that unless changes were made, the same tragedies would repeat over and over, and he wanted to make clear that these were not isolated incidents, not stories from distant observers, but events he personally stood in front of. He said it plainly that the deaths in Khan Yunis, the deaths of children and women at distribution sites, the deaths from starvation were predictable, preventable, and still allowed to happen, and that responsibility fell in part on the Americans running the system and the U.S. taxpayers funding it. Aguilar expressed that he had reached a point where staying silent would have meant betraying his values, so he chose to speak out regardless of the consequences, because in his view it was more important for the American people to know the truth than for him to stay comfortable in his career or reputation. He described how he had come home with images burned into his mind of lifeless bodies being carried away, of desperate crowds gasping for air under tear gas, of children collapsing from hunger, and he wanted to make sure that these realities were not hidden. He repeated that the noble mission he thought he signed up for had been twisted into something cruel, something dehumanizing, and he could not stand by while it continued. And so he delivered his message that unless Americans demanded accountability, the system would not change. He concluded by saying that feeding people in need is a basic human duty, and that what was happening in Gaza under the current method was not aid but harm. And he asked Americans to remember that their money, their name, and their values were attached to this system. His testimony was not about politics, but about humanity, and he wanted every viewer to carry that truth forward. Like and subscribe.